Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning in the middle of the desert, no map, no water, no food, just you, the scorching sun. And a simple question, how long can you survive? Most of us would panic. We'd start searching for water, because without it, you don't last more than 3 days. And the truth is, when it comes to money in America, most people are in the exact same kind of survival test. Only instead of water, it's cash flow. Instead of food, it's savings. And instead of shelter, it's financial security. The question is, are you surviving? Or are you slowly running out of oxygen without even realizing it? Let me ask you something. Have you ever laid in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, am I behind? You scroll through Instagram and see someone your age showing off a trip to Cancun, a shiny new car, maybe even a housewarming party, in a place that looks like it belongs on HGTV. And you can't help but think, what do they know that I don't? How are they pulling this off when I feel like I'm barely treading water? Here's the secret no one brags about online. The financial average in America looks nothing like what you see on social media. In fact, if we pulled back the curtain, the reality might shock you. Some numbers will make you breathe a sigh of relief, thinking, okay, I'm not alone. Others will slap you across the face like a cold bucket of water. But either way, by the end of this video, you'll know exactly where you stand in the grand financial survival test of America. And trust me, once you see these numbers, you'll never look at money the same way again. If you find this topic interesting, if hearing this makes you stop and reflect on where you stand right now, then do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment sharing where you are on this journey, and subscribe. Not just for me, but for yourself. Because sometimes, the first step toward financial freedom is simply admitting where you are and deciding you're ready to change the story. Now let's start with income, the first breath of survival. This is the lifeline of every American household, income. When you cash your paycheck, you're probably wondering, am I above average? Am I behind? Well, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the typical full-time worker earns just over $1,000 per week. That's about $52,000 a year before taxes. Now, before taxes is the key phrase, because Uncle Sam is like that friend who never chips in for dinner, but always eats half the fries. By the time federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare get their bite, most workers take home closer to $35,000 to $40,000 a year. Think about that for a moment. That's roughly $3,000 a month to cover everything: housing, food, transportation, healthcare, savings, emergencies, Netflix, and the occasional Starbucks run. Suddenly that average paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it sounds. Here's where I want you to pause and ask yourself a survival question. If tomorrow your paycheck was cut in half, how many weeks could you last before everything started to collapse? Retirement savings, the mirage in the desert. Now let's shift to the one area that feels like a cruel mirage in the financial desert: retirement savings. According to the Federal Reserve, the median American retirement savings balance is $65,000. $65,000. At first glance, that sounds okay, but let's break it down. If you retire with $65,000 and follow the famous 4% rule, meaning you only withdraw 4% a year to make it last, that gives you a whopping $2,600 a year. That's about $216 per month. That's not retirement. That's barely keeping the lights on. And here's where the desert survival test gets darker. About 25% of Americans have zero retirement savings. Nothing. Nada. Which means 1 out of every 4 people you see at the grocery store, the gym, or even at your office is heading into old age planning to survive on Social Security alone, if it even lasts. Picture this. A 67-year-old retiree sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, realizing their monthly Social Security check is around $1,550. That's less than what many Americans pay in rent today. Can you imagine spending your whole life working, only to retire into a survival game where the prize is scraping by on ramen noodles and praying your car doesn't break down. Spending, the hungry beast. Now let's zoom in on the part of the test that trips up most people. Spending. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the average US household spends $5,577 per month. That's about $67,000 a year. Let that sink in. Remember the average household income we talked about earlier? About $67,000 gross before taxes. Do you see the problem? The average American is spending almost everything they earn, survival mode, paycheck to paycheck. Here's the breakdown. Housing, $1,885 per month. That's $22,000 plus a year, just for a roof over your head. And if you live in New York or San Francisco, you're laughing right now because that number might not even cover a studio apartment with a window. Food, $691 per month. Groceries and takeout. That's over $8,000 a year. Unless you're a master chef with a Costco membership and a freezer full of bulk chicken, chances are you're spending even more. Transportation, $913 per month. Cars, gas, insurance, maintenance, almost $11,000 a year just to get from point A to point B. And that's before gas prices spike again. By the time you add it all up, it feels less like a budget and more like feeding a hungry beast that's never satisfied. Debt, the hidden trap. Now let's talk about the part of this financial survival test that feels like quicksand debt. The average American household carries over $9,000 in credit card debt. That's not a mortgage or an investment. That's money spent on stuff that's probably sitting in a closet, already outdated or long forgotten. Here's the cruel twist. The interest rates on credit cards are brutal. 15%, 20%, sometimes even 25% or more. That means if you're carrying $9,000 in debt at 20%, you're throwing away about $1,800 a year in interest. That's not buying you anything new. It's just making banks richer. And yet, so many people stay stuck in this trap. Why? Because in America, debt is disguised as normal. We normalize swiping for dinners, vacations, electronics and impulse buys. But in reality, every swipe is like filling your backpack with bricks and then wondering why you're so exhausted climbing the hill. Credit scores, the survival scoreboard. Finally, let's touch on the number that follows you like a shadow, your credit score. The average American FICO score is 715. That's considered good, but don't let that fool you. Plenty of people are walking around with scores in the 500s or 600s, wondering why life feels like it's charging them extra at every turn. Because here's the secret. Your credit score isn't just about loans. It determines your mortgage rates, your car payments, and in some cases, whether you even get a job. In the survival game, it's like your health bar in a video game. Ignore it, and the game ends a lot quicker. Now here's the big reveal. When you add up the income, the spending, the lack of retirement savings, the mountain of debt, and the dependence on Social Security, the financial survival test for the average American looks grim. But here's the twist. The fact that you're here, listening, learning, means you're already ahead of the pack. Because survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being aware, spotting the traps before they catch you, and making decisions that keep you alive long enough to thrive. And in this game, awareness is the first weapon you need. Before we dive deeper, pause for a moment and really think about what we just uncovered. The average person spends 4 decades working, only to retire with barely enough to survive. If that truth hit you even a little, I want you to do something right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling me how this reality makes you feel. Because acknowledging the truth is the first step toward changing it, and your future self will thank you for taking action today. Previously, we saw the shocking truth. The average American is walking into retirement with barely $88,000 saved. That's not freedom, that's survival. But here's where it gets even more eye-opening, because retirement savings is just one piece of the puzzle. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture, net worth. According to the Federal Reserve, the median net worth for American households is about $122,000. But here's the twist. Just like retirement accounts, that number hides some painful truths when you break it down by age. If you're under 35, the median net worth is less than $14,000. Now, if you're 25 years old, fresh out of school, just starting your career, $14,000 might not sound so bad. But if you're 34 and still sitting at that same $14,000, you need to stop and ask yourself a serious question. Where exactly is my financial life headed? By your mid-30s, you should be building momentum, yet most aren't. The 35 to 44 group does a little better. Their median net worth is about $91,000. But let's be real. At that age, you're supposed to be in your prime earning years. Many people have kids, a mortgage, and growing responsibilities. $91,000 isn't a cushion. It's a thin blanket in a freezing winter. By 45 to 54, the median climbs to $168,000. From 55 to 64, it's $212,000. And for those aged 65 to 74, it tops out at $266,000. At first glance, those numbers might not sound terrible. But let me tell you something fascinating. These milestones aren't out of reach for anyone with a decent income and basic discipline. You don't need to invent the next iPhone. You don't need to be Warren Buffett. You just need to spend less than you earn and invest the difference. Simple, but not easy. Because here's the catch: savings rates. The Bureau of Economic Analysis shows the average American saves just 6% of their income. 6%. That's it. Think about what that really means. If you bring home $100, you're only keeping $6. And out of that $6, you still have to cover short-term goals like a car, a down payment, or maybe even a medical emergency. How much is left for your long-term future? Almost nothing. Now let's add perspective. The average down payment on a home is $62,000. A kitchen renovation, $26,000. A new car, over $47,000. At 6%, your savings can't keep up with real life, let alone build wealth. That's why financial experts recommend saving at least 10 to 15% just for retirement, on top of what you save for everything else. And if you dream of retiring early, you'll need to save even more. Which brings us to the next harsh reality. Retirement age. When do you think most people stop working? 65. Not quite. The average American retires at 61. Now that might sound nice, but here's the problem. You can't collect full Social Security until 67. That means most people are retiring 6 years too early. 6 years they have to fund themselves, often with almost nothing saved. And if your retirement savings look like the median, about $88,000, that's enough to give you maybe $300 a month. That's not retirement, that's surviving on fumes. Here's where it gets even scarier. According to the Social Security Administration, someone who reaches 65 can expect to live another 19 to 21 years. Which means, if you retire at 61, you may need to fund 25 years or more of life after work. Let that sink in. 25 years. That's longer than many people's entire working career up to that point. And here's the haunting question. How many of those years will you still be healthy enough to enjoy? At 61, maybe you can travel, golf, play with your grandkids. But at 75, at 81, time has a way of changing the game. This is why understanding these numbers isn't just about curiosity, it's about survival. It's about realizing that the average path doesn't work. The average American has less than $90,000 saved for retirement and nearly $9,000 in credit card debt. That's not a financial plan, that's a financial trap. But here's the good news, and I really want you to hear this. The bar for average is set embarrassingly low, which means beating it doesn't require genius, it just requires discipline. If you save more than 6%, you're already ahead. If you avoid credit card debt, you're already in the top tier. If you invest consistently, Even in something as simple as low-cost index funds, you're lapping the competition. Think about it. The average household spends about $5,500 a month. If you can figure out how to live comfortably on $4,500, you've just freed up $12,000 a year for investing. Do that for 20 to 30 years, and you're not just above average, you're in a completely different financial universe. That's the compound effect. Small decisions, repeated over time, create massive differences. So here's the real takeaway. Everyone says they want financial security. Everyone says they want freedom, but the truth, most people's actions don't match their words. And maybe that's because they've never seen the numbers. Maybe they assume everyone else is doing better than they are. Or maybe they just don't know where to start. But now you know. And that knowledge is power. If you're 35 with only $14,000 to your name, you're not doomed. You've still got decades to change the story. If you're in your 50s and feel behind, it's not too late. Even small improvements compound. And if you're already doing better than average, don't get complacent. Push harder. Because the goal isn't to beat average. The goal is to build a life of freedom, peace, and dignity. The statistics tell us where the average person ends up, but they don't decide where you end up. That choice is yours. So when you step back and really look at it, the picture is clear. The average American spends 40 years working, only to retire with just enough to scrape by. Most are buried in debt, living paycheck to paycheck, and hoping Social Security will save them. That's not freedom, that's survival. And if that reality made you stop and think, then do something right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Tell me, do you believe you're on the path to freedom, or just following the crowd into struggle? Because the first step to changing your story is admitting where you stand today. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you.